a new sound was beginning to emerge, specifically tailored for these 10,000 plus mega raves.
What happened was that initially, you know, when people started making tracks in Britain, they were sort of very much like sort of copies of Chicago house and Detroit techno, and kind of not very good ones. But then gradually a sort of distinctive UK sound began to emerge. And what happened in the UK was that a kind of fusion of influences occurred in Britain that didn't, for various reasons, couldn't actually happen in Chicago. So you started to get like a sort of heavy, a sort of real, it was actually other kinds of black music being added to house and techno. You had like a very strong reggae influence with these sort of boombastic bass lines, and also like a hip-hop influence.
Yorkshire played a pivotal role in the development of the sound of hardcore. It's a sound called bleep.
Some of the people who got involved in the early days of the house scene before that, immediately before that, had been really into hip-hop. And that kind of influence reasserted itself. And they sort of added these kind of looped breakbeats from hip-hop to the rhythm because it was funkier, and it was actually kind of easier to do than actually program a drum machine. And so you ended up with this sort of bizarre hybrid sound. It was kind of like, had this hypnotic feel of house and techno, but also had this sort of boombastic bass lines from reggae and hip-hop, and this sort of gritty funkiness that came from breakbeats. And so it was like this mad mongrel sound that could only have occurred in the UK. One of the interesting things about Bleep is that it shows how sort of multicultural a lot of those cities in the north are. You know, in Leeds there was a whole kind of reggae culture based around Chapel Town, and some of the key sort of figures in the Bleep sound had actually come out of this sort of reggae sound system culture. These were sort of black British guys who turned on to techno, but they sort of kept some of the influence of reggae culture.
In Sheffield, Rob Gordon founded the Warp label, and with school friend Winston Hazel, made up 2/3 of important dance outfit Forgemasters, whose tune, A Track With No Name, would be heard in clubs like Sheffield's Jive Turkey.
Those records, however many we pressed, sold out pretty much straight away. Was it about a week or so? Within a week, we had no records left. It just went gosh. And so I said, well, I work in this business, you know, I work for EMI and different people commissioning it, and I've never seen anything this fast, you know, and it's actually really happening, so I think I better legitimise this straight away. I approached Winston's bosses at the shop, at the Fon record shop, and I approached them about starting a record label because they'd seen it and, you know, we needed to do something real with it. And they agreed to that, and they said that they were expanding and they were buying a new shop next door, and they wanted to change the name because it wasn't exactly the same people as what was at the studio at that point. And so I suggested the name Warp, and we should call the label Warp as well as the shop, so that it appears like a bigger enterprise. And we all agreed to that, and that's how the label was born.
The Warp sound was an amalgam of influences.
I've always been traditionally a reggae head, a dub fan. I've always been into electronics, so the use of electronics in a recording studio has always appealed to me. I was never into American music at all, unlike my friend Winston, and I've always had my friend Winston as my right-hand man when it comes to things to do with funk, soul, R&B, and I suppose I've added his influence to my reggae influence, and that may be what my sound is. It's essentially house techno music admitting the fact that we're black British, and that was just it was like a bit of an experiment, you know, let me put some rockers on the house, see what goes on.
Techno, that was quite influential in Sheffield, especially with Sheffield having its experimental electronics music background, with bands like Cabaret Voltaire, Chak, etc. People really warmed to the techno sound here, I think, because it was so experimental and very blunt sounding.
The hardcore sound began to bleed through to the mainstream, with the poppier, sped-up breakbeats of 2 Unlimited, Utah Saints and SL2 all making the UK pop charts. But at Heaven, in London's Charing Cross, a darker sound was beginning to ferment. A night called Rage would become seminal for a very British type of music. The club was started by Radio 1's Groove Rider and Fabio.
That's where Jungle was born, basically. We was playing kind of like a lot of techno and early house in there, and early techno, and it kind of fused into kind of breakbeat. We used to play the odd breakbeat song and realised that the real ghetto kids loved it. Whenever they used to hear the kind of, instead of the 4 to the floor of house, the breaks take on a life of their own in a bizarre sort of way. That's why I like break so much. And the kids seem to have this affinity with breakbeat.
The seeds of what was to become known as jungle had been planted.
We kind of changed the emphasis of the night. You know, it'd been a real purist house night when it first started, and we kind of like mutated it into this kind of like mad kind of breakbeat driven night.
In May of '92, a group of sound systems attempted a free party at the Avon Free Festival near Bristol, but was stopped by police. The convoy ended up at Castle Malton in the beautiful Malvern Hills. Mark from Spiral Tribe.
When we first arrived, I mean, we were probably the second or third sound system in the area. We'd been waved on to site by smiling policemen, so everything looked fine. They busied themselves playing rounders for the whole week and didn't seem at all concerned about anything. I think they rather enjoyed it actually.
The event was picked up by the BBC's 6 o'clock news, and by Saturday night, police estimated that 50,000 people were there.
It was just unbelievable, the amount of people that kept rolling onto site. So it just got bigger and bigger. And I think the Conservative estimates were that there was 50,000 plus people there by the end of it all. It was incredibly intense.
Simon Reynolds was in the crowd. He was a relative newcomer to the open-air rave.
I'd heard of the Spiral Tribe, and I'd been to like a small party they'd done in North London in an abandoned pub or something, and I'd never been to one of their country things, so I was really excited to go to one. And setting out, I thought it would be like one of their, 5,000 people in the quarry kind of events that they'd done before. I had no idea that it was going to be this massive thing, and it wasn't just Spiral Tribe, there were several other sound systems involved. Somehow word of their events had sort of spread, and all the sort of factors came together, and it was like this sort of record-breaking event where you arrived and it was like a small city had just appeared overnight. It was sort of this unmappable chaos of caravans and tents and sound systems, and also it was like kind of like a marketplace as well. There were all these people selling everything, selling drugs, but also selling souvenirs and clothing, and it was like a sort of medieval marketplace or Middle Eastern bazaar. Not a planned city, like very chaotic, no sanitation, so there was a sort of unsavoury, squalid aspect to it, where the perimeter of the rave was kind of dangerous to walk in because it was full of urine and excrement, but the actual party itself was this utopian city that had sprung up, where no one was in charge, but everything was celebration and unity.
The Spiral sound system was pumping for the whole week. Whether that was a 5, 6 or 7 day week, I'm afraid I don't remember. We were one of the first people on site, and we were the last to leave. We were always the last to switch off. You want it to be loud enough to feel. When you're dancing, you want to feel the bass in your stomach, you want to feel the mids in your chest, and you want to feel the tops on your eyelashes, don't you? It's all about moving air.
Castle Malton was one of the defining moments of rave culture. Nothing would be the same again. Next week, we'll hear about dance music